A homeless veteran in Dallas asked only for a working prosthetic. But when President Trump announced a billion-dollar military parade instead, he was enraged to find Representative Crockett's quiet fight for that one soldier was making more noise than any marching band ever could. Within minutes of her speech concluding on the House floor, the digital world ignited. The clip, captured by the stoic, unblinking eye of C-SPAN, was ripped, subtitled, and launched into cyberspace like a missile. News channels, initially occupied with stock market reports and international summits, scrambled, cutting their broadcasts to show the footage. On social media, the phrase "symbols versus servants" wasn't just a hashtag, it was a global headline being written in real time by millions of people. In the White House, the press secretary, preparing for the daily briefing, saw the clip on a monitor and felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had talking points about the parade's strength and patriotism, but he had nothing prepared for a single, proud soldier named Alastair Finch. The story was no longer about a parade. It was about a promise. A week earlier, the narrative belonged solely to the president. Inside the Oval Office, the mood was triumphant. Donald Trump, flanked by 4-star generals whose chests were adorned with ribbons, leaned over the resolute desk, a wide grin spreading across his face. Spread before them were architectural renderings and glossy concept art for what was being internally billed as the Parade of American Strength. He pointed a finger at a depiction of a fleet of M1 Abrams tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, fighter jets screaming overhead in a tight diamond formation. "Bigger," Trump declared, his voice booming with satisfaction. "I want it bigger than anything they've ever seen in France. I want the world to watch and know they can't mess with us. It's going to be beautiful." One of the generals, a man accustomed to the logistics of war, not pageantry, shifted his weight. "Mr. President, the preliminary cost analysis is significant." Trump waved a dismissive hand. "Don't talk to me about cost. Talk to me about power. This isn't an expense. It's an investment in the American brand." For him, the debate was over. The parade was a masterstroke of political theater, a tangible display of the might he felt he embodied. He saw the cheering crowds, the adoring news coverage, the sheer, overwhelming spectacle of it all. He saw victory. At that exact moment, 7,000 feet above the ground, on a commercial flight to Dallas, Jasmine Crockett was reading a different kind of report. It wasn't a glossy proposal, but a grainy PDF printout of a local news story. Her young, observant district director, a man named Marcus who had a knack for finding the human signal in the political noise, had emailed it to her with a simple subject line: "You need to see this." The story was about Sergeant Alastair Finch, U.S. Army, retired. 2 tours in Afghanistan. A Bronze Star recipient, a man who now lived at the St. Lawrence Veterans Shelter in South Dallas. The crux of the article was simple. The prosthetic leg Finch had been issued by the Department of Veterans Affairs 3 years prior was now more of a liability than a help. The socket was cracked, causing painful sores on his residual limb. The hydraulic knee joint would often lock without warning, sending him stumbling. He had fallen twice in the last month. Once in the middle of a crosswalk. His request for a new, modern prosthetic was navigating a labyrinth of paperwork, appeals, and bureaucratic delays, with no end in sight. "I'm not asking for a handout," Finch was quoted in the article. "I'm asking for the tools to put my life back together. It's hard to look a man in the eye for a job interview when you're worried your own leg is about to give out." Crockett, a woman whose entire career before Congress was built on representing individuals swallowed by indifferent systems, felt a familiar fire ignite in her gut. This wasn't an abstract policy debate about VA funding levels or legislative appropriations. This was a man who had served, who had sacrificed, and who was now being failed not by an enemy abroad, but by the very system he had sworn to defend. She saw the chasm between the two Americas that existed in that moment. The America of billion-dollar parades and the America of a cracked prosthetic in a homeless shelter. She landed in Dallas, and her first call was to her scheduler. "Clear my afternoon. I'm going to the St. Lawrence shelter. I need to meet Sergeant Finch." The shelter was clean but Spartan, smelling of disinfectant and instant coffee. Alastair Finch was a man who seemed to fold in on himself, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. He was tall, with the broad shoulders of a soldier, but his eyes were weary. He looked at the Congresswoman with a polite but deep-seated skepticism. He'd seen politicians before. They came around for photos, made promises, and disappeared. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. Crockett sat opposite him in a small, common area, ignoring the plastic chair's discomfort. "Sergeant Finch, I'm Jasmine Crockett. I read the story about you. I wanted to hear it from you myself." She didn't have a camera crew. She didn't have a press aide. It was just her, Marcus, and the veteran. Slowly, hesitantly, Finch began to talk. He didn't complain. He stated facts. He described the IED that had taken his leg outside of Kandahar. He talked about the recovery, the phantom pains, the struggle to adapt. And he talked about the leg. "This one," he said, tapping the worn carbon fiber socket. "It was okay for a while. But things wear out. People wear out. The paperwork, it's like a third tour of duty, form after form, appointment after appointment, and they keep telling me my case is under review." He looked at his hands. "I was a mechanic in the Army. I fix things. I just want to work. Get a small apartment. I want to walk to the grocery store and not have everyone stare when my knee gives out. I just want to walk like a normal person." He finally met her eyes, and the weariness was replaced by a flicker of defiance. "I just want to be able to walk to a job interview without falling, ma'am." The words hung in the air, simple, devastating, and true. For Crockett, this was the moment of crystallization. This was the why. The President's Parade was an abstraction of power. Alastair Finch's broken leg was the reality of service. She thanked him for his time and his candor. As she and Marcus walked out into the Texas heat, she was silent for a long time. Then she turned to him. "Get me the specs and the average cost of a new sea leg prosthetic. The good kind. Get me the estimated cost of the President's Parade. And get me the list price of one M1 Abrams tank." Marcus looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to go to work," Crockett replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Just like Sergeant Finch is trying to do." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Crockett's team in D.C. compiled the numbers. A state-of-the-art microprocessor-controlled prosthetic knee, like the Autobox C-Leg 4, cost roughly $60,000, including the custom fitting and physical therapy. The White House, in a moment of hubris, had let the parade's estimated price tag slip, $1.2 billion. The cost of a single, new M1 Abrams tank, the kind Trump wanted rolling past the White House? Roughly $10 million. Crockett's legislative director was nervous. "Jasmine, if you go to the floor with this, you're not just taking on a policy, you're taking on the President's personal pet project. The blowback will be intense." Crockett looked at the photo of Alastair Finch that she had printed and placed on her desk. "Good," she said. "Let it be." The trigger came on a Wednesday. President Trump was speaking at a rally at a naval air station in Florida, the stage flanked by gleaming fighter jets. He was in his element, feeding off the energy of the massive crowd. He was talking up the parade, promising a spectacle of patriotism the likes of which the world had never seen. Then, he went off script. "We're going to show our strength, and we're not going to apologize for it," he bellowed. "We're not like these other people, these do-nothing politicians in Washington. All they do is complain. They find some sob story, they cry about it on television, and they try to make us feel guilty for being strong. They want to make us weak." The crowd roared its approval. In her D.C. office, Crockett was watching the speech on a live feed. Her team was gathered around the monitor. When Trump spat out the words, "sob story," a hush fell over the room. Crockett's jaw tightened. She stood up and turned off the television. She looked at her chief of staff. "That's it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He just wrote my speech for me." She picked up her notes and the photo of Sergeant Finch. Let's go to the floor. The House of Representatives chamber was mostly empty, as is common during the period reserved for one-minute speeches and special orders at the end of the legislative day. The real audience wasn't the handful of sleepy members and staff scattered across the seats. It was the unblinking C-SPAN cameras that broadcast this chamber into millions of homes, offices, and waiting rooms across the country. Jasmine Crockett walked deliberately to the Democratic lectern. She placed her papers down and, for a moment, set the small 4x6 photograph of Alastair Finch beside them, angled so she could see it. She took a breath, gripped the sides of the lectern, and looked directly into the main camera. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice steady and clear, echoing slightly in the vast, quiet room. "I rise today not to talk about polls or politics, but about priorities. I rise to talk about promises, the promises we make as a nation, and the promises we fail to keep." She paused, letting the words settle. This week, the White House announced its plan for a grand Parade of American Strength, a magnificent spectacle, we are told, that will cost the American taxpayer an estimated $1.2 billion. A parade to showcase our power, our prestige, our military might, and I have no doubt it would be a sight to behold. She leaned slightly forward. "But I am forced to ask a simple question today. What is the true measure of American strength? Is it the number of tanks we can line up on Pennsylvania Avenue? Is it the roar of jet engines over the Capitol Dome? Or is it how we treat the men and women who earned us our freedom in the first place?" She then picked up the photograph. It was a simple picture, a close-up of Alastair Finch's face, taken outside the shelter. His expression was tired but dignified. She held it up so the camera could see it clearly. "This is Sergeant Alastair Finch, United States Army. He served 2 tours of duty for our country in Afghanistan. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his valor. He came home, but like too many of his brothers and sisters, he did not come home whole. He lost his leg to an enemy bomb, and today, Sergeant Finch is homeless. He lives in a shelter in my home state of Texas." A few members on the floor, who had been idly checking their phones, were now looking up, their attention captured. "Sergeant Finch is not asking for a parade. He's not asking for a flyover. He is asking for a leg. A working prosthetic leg so that he can walk to a job interview without pain and without fear of falling. His current VA-issued prosthetic is broken. It causes him injury. His request for a replacement, a piece of equipment that costs $60,000, is buried under a mountain of government paperwork." $60,000. Crockett placed the photo back on the lectern, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. "Now, let's do some basic math, the kind of math we should all be able to understand. The President's parade is set to cost $1.2 billion. One of the main battle tanks he wants featured in this parade, a brand new M1 Abrams, cost the taxpayer $10 million. $10 million. She let that number hang in the air. For the price of just one of those tanks, just one, we could provide a state-of-the-art prosthetic leg not just to Sergeant Finch, but to 166 of his fellow veterans. One tank, or a life of mobility and dignity for 166 American heroes. But the parade isn't calling for one tank. It's calling for dozens. It's a $1.2 billion celebration of our hardware, while the men who operated that hardware are forgotten." Her voice began to rise, not in volume but in intensity. She was no longer just a legislator. She was a public defender making her closing argument. Earlier today, from a stage of military splendor, the President of the United States mocked those who bring attention to what he called sob stories. He suggested that caring for our own, tending to our wounded, is a sign of weakness. He implied that stories like Sergeant Finch's are an inconvenience to the narrative of power he wants to project. She shook her head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on her face. "Mr. President, Alastair Finch is not a sob story. He is a story of courage. He is a story of sacrifice. His story is not a mark of America's weakness, It is a mark of America's character, and our failure to help him is not his sob story, sir. It is our national shame." She took a final, deep breath, her gaze locked on the camera. This was the moment. This was the reason she had come to the floor. We are a nation that faces a choice. It is a choice between performance and purpose, between pageantry and people, between the grand gesture and the quiet obligation. We have to decide if we are a nation that values the symbols of service more than the servants themselves. She gathered her papers and the photograph, her hands steady. "I yield back my time." With that, she turned and walked away from the lectern, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in on the empty podium, a silent testament to the devastating power of the words that had just been spoken. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait to see the reaction. As she walked briskly from the House chamber, the weight of the moment hadn't yet landed. It was the familiar feeling after a trial, the adrenaline-fueled focus giving way to a quiet void. She was met in the speaker's lobby by her chief of staff, Anthony, a man normally defined by his unflappable calm. But his calm was gone. His eyes were wide, and he was holding his phone out as if it were a strange, alien artifact that was vibrating itself to pieces. "Jasmine, my God, look," he whispered, his voice strained. She looked at the screen. It was a chaotic mosaic of her own face. Twitter was a waterfall of notifications. News alerts from CNN, Fox News, the Associated Press, all using the same pull quote, "Symbols of service versus the servants themselves." The C-SPAN clip, not even 10 minutes old, already had hundreds of thousands of views and was multiplying exponentially. Veterans, a community often fractured by politics, were uniting around it with a singular, powerful voice. The official accounts of the VFW, the American Legion, and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America had all shared the video. Anthony scrawled, showing her posts from individual soldiers and their families, each one a heartbreaking echo of Alastair Finch's story. "My dad's been waiting 18 months for a new wheelchair. The VA canceled my PTSD counseling appointment again." Symbols versus servants. She nailed it. The White House briefing that afternoon was a bloodbath. The press secretary, a man chosen for his loyalty, walked to the podium armed with talking points about patriotism and the president's unwavering support for the military. He was met with a wall of questions he couldn't answer. "Does the president agree with Congresswoman Crockett's assessment of the parade's cost?" a reporter from Reuters shouted. "Does the president stand by his sob story comment? And was he referring to veterans like Sergeant Finch?" another asked. The secretary tried to deflect, to pivot, to attack. "Congresswoman Crockett is engaging in the worst kind of political theater," he stammered. But the words were hollow. The story was too simple, too human. A reporter from a major network held up his phone. "Sir, Sergeant Alastair Finch is now the #1 trending topic in the world. Does the president have a message for him?" The press secretary had no answer. He was a foot soldier sent to fight a tank with a butter knife. The president, according to insiders, was watching from the residence, his fury growing with every question. It wasn't the plight of the veteran that angered him. It was the humiliation. A freshman congresswoman had hijacked his narrative, turned his victory lap into a public shaming, and made him look both cruel and foolish on the world stage. That night, the victory felt a million miles away. Crockett sat on the lumpy couch of her small D.C. apartment, a place that was more of a functional way station than a home. The adrenaline had long since metabolized, leaving a profound, leaden exhaustion in its place. She was picking at a container of cold pad thai, the television off. The silence of the room, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside its walls. Her personal cell phone, which she'd put on silent, buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a dizzying cascade of unknown numbers and notifications. Then, a call came through that she had to answer. The screen read, "Letitia," her older sister. She took a deep breath and answered, "Hey, Letty." "Jasmine Marie Crockett, don't you? Hey, letting me." Her sister's voice came through, a familiar mix of exasperation and fierce affection. Letitia was a high school principal back in Texas. a woman who dealt with chaos daily and had no patience for nonsense. "Mom has called me 6 times in the last hour. She saw you on the news and thinks you're about to be arrested." "Are you okay?" Jasmine managed a small laugh. "I'm fine, Letty. I'm not getting arrested." "Oh, I know that. I saw the speech. You absolutely eviscerated him. It was brilliant, Jazz. Truly." A wave of warmth washed over Crockett, the first genuine feeling she'd had in hours. "Thanks," she said quietly. "But," Letitia's tone shifted, the pride replaced by a hard edge of concern. "You know what comes with this, right? You poked the biggest bear in the woods with the sharpest stick you could find. The things people are saying online, it's ugly." Jasmine closed her eyes. She knew. "It's just noise, Letty. It's part of the job." "Noise?" "One of the comments on the local news site said you should go back to Africa. Another one posted your DC apartment address." "That's not noise, Jasmine. That's a threat. Please, just be careful. Get security. Do something. For Mom, if not for you." "I will," Crockett promised. A promise she wasn't sure how she would keep. "Tell Mom I'm fine. And I love you." After she hung up, a morbid curiosity got the better of her. She opened her laptop and navigated to her public social media page. Letitia hadn't been exaggerating. For every message of support, there were 5, filled with a venom that was breathtaking in its intensity. The messages were a toxic stew of racism and misogyny. Her photo had been crudely edited into targets. There were detailed fantasies of violence. One message simply said, "We know where you live. We're waiting." The cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through her exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, she felt a tremor of fear. She was alone in her apartment, hundreds of miles from family, and she had made herself a target for the rage of millions. She snapped the laptop shut, the click echoing in the quiet room. The silence now felt different. It felt heavier, more menacing. She got up and double-checked the lock on her front door. The next 2 days were a blur of media combat. The administration, recovering from its initial shock, launched a full-throated counter-assault. The president himself fired off a series of posts on his social media platform. The radical left congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine Crockett, is using a fine veteran as a political pawn to attack our great military. She is all talk, no action. Sad. Another post accused her of being anti-American and wanting to weaken our nation in front of our enemies. The message was clear. She was the enemy, a performative traitor. And the parade was a test of one's patriotism. The well-oiled machinery of the pro-Trump media roared to life, echoing the talking points. Pundits questioned her motives, her patriotism, her very right to speak on military matters. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The clean, simple narrative was becoming muddy, bogged down in the familiar trenches of partisan warfare. Then on Friday afternoon, the entire political landscape shifted from an unexpected epicenter, a soundproofed radio studio in Phoenix, Arizona. Garrison Hawk, host of the ultra-popular conservative talk show Hawk's Roost, leaned into his microphone. Hawk was an institution on the right, a former Marine sniper with a gravelly voice and a worldview forged in combat and Reaganomics. He was known for his unyielding support of the military and his utter disdain for progressive Democrats. His millions of listeners tuned in, fully expecting him to spend the next hour tearing Jasmine Crockett to shreds. Hawk began his show, as he always did, with a calm, deliberate monologue. "Good afternoon, patriots," he rumbled. "There's a lot going on, a lot of noise out of Washington, and at the center of it is a speech by a Texas congresswoman named Jasmine Crockett." He paused. "Now, you all know me. You know where I stand. I think Congresswoman Crockett's voting record is an unmitigated disaster for this country. I disagree with her on taxes, on the border, on energy, on just about everything under the sun. I wouldn't vote for her if she was running for dog catcher." He let his listeners settle in, nodding along in their cars and workplaces. Then came the turn. "But I'm also a Marine," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "and I listened to every single word she said on that House floor. And I've got to tell you something, and it pains me to say it, but on this, she's 100% right. A collective shock hung in the silence he allowed to build.
We have a sacred pact in this country, a promise.
You go over there, you fight for us, you put your body and your soul on the line, and when you come home, we take care of you. Period. It's the one thing that shouldn't be political. The one line we don't cross. He described his own friends who had battled the VA for years just to get the basic care they were promised. We cannot, as a nation, spend over $1 billion to polish up our tanks and fly our jets in a big parade, while the men and women who drove those tanks and flew those jets are living in homeless shelters and fighting for a prosthetic leg. It's a disgrace. He was practically whispering into the microphone now, but his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. This isn't about being anti-military. Taking care of our veterans is the most pro-military thing we can do. This isn't peacetime pageantry. It's a betrayal of our priorities. The president is my commander-in-chief, and I respect the office, but he is dead wrong on this. And Jasmine Crockett, God help me, is right. This isn't a left issue or a right issue. This is an American issue, and we need to fix it. The impact of Hawke's monologue was like a political-shaped charge, blasting through the partisan walls the White House had tried to erect. It wasn't just an endorsement. It was a permission slip. It gave conservatives, both voters and politicians, the ideological cover to break with the president without being branded a traitor. The dam broke. Within hours, a Republican senator from North Carolina, a state with a massive military presence, released a statement saying, "While a celebration of our armed forces is always welcome, we must ensure our first priority is the health and well-being of our veterans." Another from Arizona followed suit. A group of Republican congressmen, all veterans themselves, held a joint press conference urging the president to reconsider the parade and redirect the funds to address the VA's critical shortfalls. The White House was suddenly completely isolated. The story was no longer Crockett versus Trump. It was now a unified chorus of voices, from the progressive left to the hawkish right, all saying the same thing. The parade was indefensible. The bipartisan tsunami was something the White House could not withstand. The story was no longer controllable. It had escaped the gravity of the 24-hour news cycle and become something more enduring, a moral question that everyone, regardless of political affiliation, felt compelled to answer. Late on Friday, the capitulation came, not with a bang, but with a whimper. The White House press secretary released a brief, 75-word statement. After productive discussions with military leaders, it read, "The President has decided to postpone the Parade of American Strength to a later date. This will ensure all of our nation's resources remain focused on military readiness and the well-being of our incredible service members." There was no mention of Jasmine Crockett, no mention of Alastair Finch, no mention of the billion-dollar cost. But the world knew. It was a surrender disguised as a strategic retreat. In Dallas, a different kind of victory was taking shape. Crockett's district office, which had been deluged with hate-filled calls just days before, was now overwhelmed with offers of help. A local logistics company offered to handle shipping for any donated medical supplies. A construction firm offered to renovate a wing of the St. Lawrence shelter for free. Most astonishingly, a GoFundMe page, started by a Dallas mother of two who had been moved by the speech, had gone supernova. With a modest goal of $60,000 to buy Sergeant Finch his leg, it had soared past $500,000 in less than a week, fueled by small-dollar donations from every state in the Union. People weren't just angry, they were activated. A week after her speech, Jasmine Crockett held another press conference. She didn't choose the grand backdrop of the U.S. Capitol. She stood on the sun-drenched lawn outside the Dallas VA Medical Center, a place of healing and, for many, of frustration. To her right stood Sergeant Alastair Finch. He was wearing a donated suit and tie, and he stood tall and straight. He did not yet have his new leg, but he had something he'd lost long ago, his visibility. He's no longer a case number or a sob story. He was a man who had been seen. Crockett stepped to the bank of microphones. "Good morning," she began. "A little over a week ago I spoke on the House floor about our nation's priorities. I am not the only one who spoke. The American people spoke. People like Garrison Hawk, a man I disagree with on almost everything, who chose principle over party, Republican members of Congress who chose patriotism over politics, and hundreds of thousands of ordinary Americans who chose to act." She turned and smiled at Sergeant Finch. "I am thrilled to announce that thanks to the incredible generosity of the American people, Sergeant Finch will be receiving the best state-of-the-art prosthetic care available. But it doesn't end there." She explained that after Finch's care was secured, the remaining donated funds would be used to launch a new nonprofit foundation. "It will be called Finch's Friends," she announced, "and its mission will be to provide rapid, no-red-tape emergency grants to veterans in North Texas who are falling through the cracks of the bureaucracy. It will help with rent, with medical bills, with putting food on the table. It will be a promise kept." Then she looked directly into the cameras, her voice clear and unwavering, delivering the message that would define the entire affair. This was never about a parade, and with all due respect to Sergeant Finch, it was never just about one soldier. This was about a fundamental choice, a choice between the symbols of our strength and the sources of our strength. It's a choice between spending our treasure on displays of power or investing it in the people who gave that power its meaning. The American people, from all walks of life, from every political belief, gave their answer this week. They chose the servant over the symbol. They chose compassion over pageantry. They chose to honor our heroes with action, not just applause. Now, it is time for their government in Washington to listen, not just on parade days, but every single day. 3 weeks later, in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the final echo of that choice was taking shape. Brielle, a 16-year-old high school junior who usually found politics to be an incomprehensible and boring argument between old people, sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. Her civics teacher, Mr. Abernathy, had given the class an assignment. Watch any political speech from the past month and write a one-page analysis of its persuasive techniques. Scrolling through a news site, she bypassed speeches about trade policy and judicial appointments.
Then she saw a headline: "The speech that canceled $1 billion parade." Intrigued, she clicked. She expected to be bored. She wasn't. She saw Jasmine Crockett hold up the photo. She heard the story of Sergeant Finch. She listened to the simple, devastating math. 1 tank or 166 legs. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't filled with jargon. It was a story about a person who needed help and a government that was looking the other way. For the first time, politics wasn't an abstract concept to her. It was real. It was a choice between right and wrong, and she was angry that the wrong choice had almost been made. The final scene is not in Washington, D.C. It's in the noisy, chaotic gymnasium of Northwood High School. The smell of popcorn and floor wax hangs in the air. A local news camera is pointed at a nervous but determined-looking Brielle. Behind her, a large, hand-painted banner reads, "Ohio Students for Vets." All around them, students are washing cars in the parking lot and selling trays of brownies and cupcakes. It was Brielle's idea, an idea she had pitched to Mr. Abernathy the day after watching the speech. The reporter, a friendly woman from the local channel, leaned in with her microphone. "Brielle, this is amazing. You've already raised over $2,000 for local veterans. What made you decide to do all this?" Brielle swallowed, looked at the camera, and spoke. I had to watch a speech for a class assignment, and I saw the one about the soldier who needed a leg," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "And I realized politics isn't just something old people shout about on TV. It's about a real guy, and a tank he didn't need, and someone deciding it was wrong and speaking up." She paused, a small, determined smile on her face. "I figured I can speak up too, even if it's just with cupcakes." What does true patriotism look like to you? Is it a grand display of national power, or the quiet promise to care for those who served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that challenge the official narrative,
Don't forget to like and subscribe.